Hello YouTube, my name is Emily. As you can see, I have shorn my hair. New year, new hair, new me. And today, I'm bringing you my 2020 reading plans. There are so many of these videos going up, but I thought that making a video like this would really help me form my TBR for the year. I had a pretty good reading year last year, but I think it could have done with a little bit of structure. I was just sort of mood reading, so I was wondering if having an official yearly TBR would help me along the way throughout this year. So these are 20 books I want to read in 2020 in no particular order. So yes, let's talk about some books. One of the first books I want to read in 2020 is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This has been on my TBR for God knows how long. I actually planned to read this during Tome Topple Readathon, but that did not work out. I've had this book for ages and never got around to it despite so many people telling me that I have to read it. As far as I know, this novel follows 6 different narratives that eventually nest together, and that's as much as I know about it. I'm just gonna go in cold. I think there's another Tome Topple Readathon happening early this year, so this is gonna be on my TBR. The next book on my list is a book that I'm already reading, and that's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's about an alternative Regency England with wizards, and the story centers on 2 very powerful wizards who have differing ideas about the potential of magic. The narrative and dialogue are very witty and subtle. The characters are great and very real. I'm reading this on a combination of Kindle and audiobook. The audiobook is great, I highly recommend. I'm hoping to finish out this book this month. I was going to try and read it before the end of 2019, but I realized I hadn't left myself enough time, and I really didn't want to rush through this book. So with any luck, I'll be able to finish this by the end of January or beginning of February. Next on my list is Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I'm not sure if this is also part of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, but I just know that it is great, layered epic fantasy, and that everyone is telling me to read it. It's quite a darling among booktubers who love fantasy as well, but it was one of my goals for this year to read more Brandon Sanderson, so it's probably going to go on my TBR for the next Tome Topple Readathon. The next book on my list is also by Brandon Sanderson. It's Well of Ascension, which is the next in his Mistborn series. Generally, I just want to finish the trilogy this year. I just feel like I'm missing out on a whole chunk of the fantasy genre by not reading this trilogy, and of course this trilogy is just a go-to for Brandon Sanderson. I did read the first book a couple years ago. I did enjoy it. I thought the dialogue was a little bit mechanical, but I'm told that everything gets better with Well of Ascension, so of course I have to read it. The next book on my list is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. The BBC miniseries is one of my favorite period pieces of all time. It's basically Pride and Prejudice, but set during the Industrial Revolution. It's set in a fictionalized version of Manchester. So the main character of this novel is a girl called Margaret Hale, and she and her family are impoverished and are forced to move to Milton, or really Manchester, in order to improve their financial circumstances. In the process, she interacts with this rich mill owner called John Thornton. They butt heads at first, but then a romance develops. At least in the miniseries, this sort of romance is really well done. And also in general, I've been wanting to read more Victorian literature. And I've also had this copy for years. I think my mom had a stab at this and couldn't get into it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to finally getting into this book this year. Next up is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. If you have been watching my channel long enough, you know that her novel The Night Circus is one of my favorite books of all time. So of course I'm a sucker for anything else she has written. This book is about a college student called Zachary who discovers a book that leads him on a quest, which sounds kind of like any standard video game quest. But apparently it's very artfully done, and apparently there's some really nice magic in this book. And lots of booktubers are saying great things about this book, so I'm also looking forward to jumping in and getting in on the conversation. Next up on my list is 5 Dark Fates by Kendar Blake. This is the final book in the 3 Dark Crowns series. I have the second book here, 1 Dark Throne. This series is easily one of my favorite series in the past few years. It's about an island queendom that is ruled by 3 competing magical factions. I have loved all of the books that I read so far. It has such great characters. It is such a great political fantasy drama. I love seeing these different schemes unfold and either go wrong or right. And the last book, 2 Dark Reigns, ended on a really horrible cliffhanger, so of course I need to read that last book. Next up is A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book of the Shades of Magic series. I reread read the first book, Darker Shade of Magic, last year. I actually really enjoyed it the second time around. I think the first time I read it, I was really rushed, but this time I actually allowed myself to enjoy the magic system and the characters. With any luck, I should actually finish this series this year. I really want to read more V.E. Schwab. I've just enjoyed a lot of her work. I feel like Shades of Magic is one of those crown jewels of her repertoire, and I think this is one of the novels where her world building is best and most intricate. So another large but very anticipated read. Next on my list is A Shadow Bright and Burning by Jessica Clewis. This is supposed to be set in an alternative Victorian England with wizards as well. Of course, I am down for any kind of Victorian fantasy. Sam from Thoughts on Tomes was talking about it, and she said it should be revered like one of Cassie Clare's works. And you really just can't beat an endorsement like that. And it's also one of those books that I've had on Kindle for the longest time. And of course, one of my other goals for this year was to actually read those books that I've been buying as part of Kindle Daily Deals. At this point, not reading this book is inexcusable, so I definitely need to read this. Speaking of Cassie Clare, the next book on my list is City of Fallen Angels by Cassie Clare. This is a continuation of series that I need to finish but haven't. So I left off at City of Glass back in 2018, and I haven't continued with the series since. But the thing is, in order to read other books in her Shadowhunters universe, like Lady Midnight, I have to finish the Mortal Instruments series. So City of Fallen Angels is the next book, and like with other series in this video, I have the tentative hope of finishing this series this year. It's one of those cultural milestones in YA fantasy that I am just missing out on because I have not finished this series. And of course, with finishing this series might come an Infernal Devices reread. Maybe, I'm not sure. Next up on my list is Der Vorleser by Bernhard Schlink. I've been reading this book since around 2012, which is pretty damn egregious. Of course, this is a German novel. You may know it by its English title, The Reader. It was made into an Oscar-nominated film with Kate Winslet and Ralph Fiennes. I feel like I've been reading this book my whole life. I just don't read very fast in German. Naturally, I don't. German is not my native language, but I've been wanting so long to read German novels and improve my reading comprehension, and by extension improve my vocabulary. But yeah, I've been picking this up and putting it down for ages, so no guarantees here, but I'm wondering if I can make this the year that I finally finish reading Der Vorleser. Next on my list is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. This is another one of those fantasy series that has been eluding me for ages. I have it on Kindle, and it's just there waiting for me. But somehow I've just never gotten around to it. It's basically a revenge story from what I hear, but I did enjoy Illuminae, which was co-written by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, and J. Kristoff is just generally a really renowned writer. And this is just one of those other series where I feel like I'm just missing out on a whole sphere of the fantasy genre by not reading it. And also apparently there's a black cat in it, so that's cool. Next up is Wayward Son by Rainbow Rowell. This, of course, is the sequel to Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. And of course, Carry On is the fanfic about Simon Snow that is being written in Fangirl. It's a really great, humorous twist on Harry Potter and the hero and the chosen one. It's also really funny and heartwarming. And apparently this is just a really fun ride. People apparently love it. And I'm personally also looking forward to being with these characters again and following their shenanigans. Also, by the way, this copy is amazing. This is the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition. There's like extra art in the end papers. Also, this edition is signed and I didn't even notice. Next on my list is not really just one book, it's more the next few books in this series, and that's Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing, the saga of Swamp Thing. This is a graphic novel series that I've been really enjoying. It's about a man called Alec Holland who dies in the swamplands, but then his consciousness is returned as this creature called Swamp Thing. He has all kinds of amazing abilities like growing things at will and generating himself in other places. It's a really great exploration of a human mind coping with being given the powers of a god. And I can see some of that exploration further playing out in books like Watchmen. This is a really fun series that I'm looking forward to continuing. Also in graphic novels, I really want to continue the Hellblazer Hellblazer series. I read the first volume of Hellblazer when I was in Australia this summer, and I really enjoyed it. It's about a working class magician called John Constantine, and he's just kind of a jerk to everybody. He's a very morally ambiguous character. He is not afraid to harm people that he cares about in order to achieve a certain end. But the thing is, he is a very compelling character. He's very charismatic. And of course, the first volume of Hellblazer ended with an appearance from Swamp Thing, which made me really happy. I'm not gonna finish the series this year. It is a very long series. I think it's got 20 volumes in it or something. So nonetheless, really looking forward to following John Constantine again on more hellish adventures. Next on my list is Kushields Dart by Jacqueline Carey. This is the first book in the Kushiel's Legacy series. I think it's one of those series that maybe isn't mainstream famous, but is very famous in the fantasy genre. It's a fantasy about angels and courtesans, which is a really interesting combination. Tome Topple Readathon, that's when I'll take care of that. Next on my 2020 TBR is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This series is all the rage right now, and it just concluded. This series takes place in a universe where people can't die, so in order to control the population, there are these people called Scythes who then cull people. Seems like a really fascinating dystopic setup. Also, I've had it in my Audible library for ages, so I don't know why I haven't read it yet. Next on my list is Swing Time by Zadie Smith. This is another one of those books that has been eluding me, despite the fact that Zadie Smith is one of my favorite authors of all time. If there was ever a literary fiction author that I wanted to emulate, it would be Zadie Smith. This novel is apparently about two girls who love dancing, but then diverge into their different paths. And apparently there's a really interesting exploration of race, which there always is in Zadie Smith's novels. And apparently the audiobook is amazing. And it's been really interesting to me to watch Zadie Smith's style evolve and change since she was in her early 20s. I love White Teeth, of course, it's one of my favorite books, but I'm really looking forward to reading a more mature Zadie Smith novel. Next up is a book that I'm probably going to read this winter. It's The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is apparently a fantasy based on Russian or Slavic folklore. I've heard it's really beautifully written and is actually historically non-anachronistic for a change. I think Reagan from Peruse Project really loves this book, and she said that it's a historical fantasy that actually accounts for the real circumstances that a woman of that time would go through. And I really love seeing that in books. It's just an unfortunate trend I see of 2010s women being stuck in historical eras and projecting their own modernity onto that time. And in order to do justice to a certain time period, you also have to do justice to those attitudes as well. So that's something I'm really looking forward to reading. I've been looking for ages for really period-appropriate historical fantasy, so this book just might be it. And the final book on my list is the Prose Edda, or simply the Edda by Snorri Sturluson. This is kind of an Old Norse compilation of work that was done by this 13th century scholar, Snorri Sturluson. It deals a lot with Norse and Viking sagas and legends. This year I've been looking to engage a lot more with this culture and faith and history, and of course the Edda is always a really good place to start. A lot of scholars, of course, have debated over the years about how seriously we can take Snorri Sturluson's work, because he was a Christian scholar, and he, of course, projected a lot of his own Christian ideals on these Viking stories, which were, you know, not Christian. But it is one of the quintessential relics we have about what this culture and people were like and what their stories were. So nonetheless, it is a good place to start. So that's it for my reading plans for 2020. Let me know down below what books you plan to read in 2020. If you have other book recommendations, send them my way. I really do apologize for this delayed upload schedule. I have been home in the States for the holidays, and I've been dealing with other work. So just lots of things have gotten in the way of me filming these videos and keeping up a regular upload schedule. But I am back in my element, and I will have new videos coming soon. In the meantime, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. You can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads and Instagram, and I will see you in my next video.